We're going to have a conversation with Neil Oliver about how we avoid the dystopian future we're marching headfirst into using the past as a roadmap. Now, you might be familiar with Neil already. He's the Scottish archaeologist, author, and presenter who's been an outspoken critic of COVID measures, climate change, of the one world government, and globalist agenda. You might have seen him on GB News, where he hosts a show once per week, or on his YouTube channel, where he hosts an incredible historical podcast called Love Letter to the World. He does these really amazing deep dive historical stories of empires of the past and what we can learn from them. I definitely highly recommend watching them in order to learn more about history, which I really do think in turn will help us make sense of the present. Neil is also the author of nearly 20 books. I don't know where he finds the time, including A History of Scotland, The Story of the World in 100 Moments, Not Forgotten, The Great War in Our Modern Memory and Wisdom of the Ancients, Life Lessons from Our Distant Past. So lots of different books. Those are just a few of them. We have a lot to learn from history and from Neil, who's coming right up. I want to tell you about a crime happening in the US the FBI calls house stealing, also known as title theft. This is very scary, where criminals can transfer your home's title into their name with just a single document. There's this family in Sarasota. Home Title Lock caught a cyber thief from New York trying to sell their property on a popular real estate website. The thief had fraudulently changed the title, but Home Title Lock quickly detected it and restored the title back to the rightful owner. If they hadn't subscribed to Home Title Lock, it would have been legal and financial nightmare, you could only imagine. And it's happening all over the US. These criminals can transfer your title, they could sell your home, or they could take loans out against it, wiping out all of your equity without you even knowing. That's why I've partnered with our friends at Home Title Lock. Their triple lock protection monitors your property, alerts you of any changes, and has a team of restoration experts on standby to fix fraud when it occurs. So if you're an American homeowner, you're a potential victim of title fraud. Sign up today at HometitleLock.com or use the link in the description and use that promo code Iverson for 30 days of triple lock protection and a history report of your home's title for free, so you can make sure your home hasn't already been compromised. That's 30 days free and a title report using the promo code Iverson. The link is down below. Hi, Neil. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm delighted, Kim. Thanks for making time for me. Good to see you.
So I was just telling everybody about all of the books you've written and your great podcast of how you really dive into history, these love letters that you write, love letters to the world. And you dive into the history of things. And so I really am curious about your viewpoint of there's a few things. I know you've been a critic of the one world government. I know you've been a critic of COVID lockdowns, obviously the vaccines, climate change agenda, all of these things that many of us are concerned about when it comes to the WEF, the agenda, the you'll own nothing and you'll be happy sort of scenario. So I'm really super curious. And I know that with the UK, you were for Scotland remaining within the UK. So you're for the unity. When you go through history, and I know on your podcast you've explored this numerous times, that there's fractions, when Europe was very much more divided, and then there's been times when they've had unity and times of division. You look at just even individual nations like Italy, for example, that once was a number of nations that then became one nation of Italy, right? So you see these times throughout history where there's a lot of little nations that then become bigger nations. And it almost sounds like that's what they're wanting to happen with this kind of globalization, this bringing us all together. The EU is an example of that, I would say, one of the numerous iterations that you've discussed throughout history. So is it always a bad thing? I mean, I'm one with you. I've always been really skeptical of this one world government and this agenda, but is it always a bad thing for us to be uniting as one? If you could do you see what I'm asking?
I do. I think centralizing on a grand scale is inevitably a bad idea. I think anything that seeks to set aside the reality of complexity is doomed to failure. And I think the hubris that comes around again and again of an individual, whatever, a king, an emperor, or an organization like the EU that persuades itself that it has all the wisdom and all the reach to take control of everyone's lives, a one size fits all top down solution to everything, is just doomed to failure. And I do increasingly, I mean, I would never have 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would never have classified myself as an anarchist, which is to say, really the minimal government, smallest government, the least amount of government possible. I wouldn't really have thought to describe myself in that way because of there are attendant challenges with that worldview also. But at the moment, in the same way that if I had to make a straight binary choice between absolute freedom of speech, the freedom to say anything at all, use any language, be as offensive and provocative as you want, or to be handed a sort of a laminated card every day with what you're compelled to say, then I'd have to take the free speech absolutist choice. And
Mhm.
because of the way things are being nudged and herded at the moment towards this, it's either a centralized government or it's our way or the highway. I would have to opt for minimal government because it's the least worst option.
And you've seen that throughout history. I mean, I just, um, even in just going through some of your podcasts, the it seems like there was more unity. Like, for example, under Charlemagne, right? Wasn't there more unity and it was better when he was able to unify versus when it started to be fractured by his three sons?
Well, the unity to some extent is an optical illusion, and it looks more unified in hindsight, hundreds of years later, than it could possibly have felt at the time. Even before Charlemagne, Roman emperors, the whoever was the emperor at any given moment, mattered to his intimates and the faction that were either for him or against him. But out in the provinces, out in Britannia or whatever, nobody would have known who the emperor was. They simply wouldn't have known who it was. Why would they? They might have seen his face on a coin if some of the coinage stamped in his name had time to reach them before he was replaced by somebody else.
Mhm.
And likewise, I mean, Charlemagne, any of them, they didn't have, mercifully for all our sakes, they didn't have the reach, not in any practical sense. There were, there were earlier iterations of Spanish kings where they were able to say that they were ruling over empires upon which the sun never set, but they didn't have the reach to make that practical. Charlemagne certainly didn't. People wouldn't have known people out in the boondocks, out in the burbs, wouldn't have known who he was. Nor did they need to. Neither did he care. The problem we've now got is the reach is there for these centralists because of the technological digital cage,
Mhm.
we've clamped on the manacles ourselves. We've taken it voluntarily in return for convenience and free stuff and all of the rest of it. And now they have the reach to take control of life in terms of central bank digital currencies, 15-minute cities, social credit systems, constant surveillance, facial recognition, biometrics, and all of the rest of it. They really can. The potential, not as yet not enacted, but the potential is now there for them to have that minute by minute control over all of our lives. And so where you would look back and say, yeah, Charlemagne unified the Franks, and he created an iteration of something that was then replicated. The Holy Roman Empire was then replicated by the European Union or whatever. But it wasn't. It didn't mean the same thing in those days because the technology and the reach wasn't there. They didn't have the state capacity.
Yeah. What do you think they benefited from? Like, what would we have to lose if we decided to, create this sort of, um, if we're going to detach ourselves from these governments that are trying to control us, that kind of puts us into this. Like you said, you never consider yourself an anarchist before, but it almost would. reel us into that, right? We'd be living in these little communities where we would hopefully govern ourselves, we would run ourselves. But I would imagine we would lose a lot. I mean, one of the things like the Roman Empire brought about was standardized coin, right? Also roads, um, infrastructure. So you've got these systems that, and we need to be, the internet, for example, we have to actually run these cables from place to place to place in order to
Yeah,
have that.
I think the difference is, I mean, for whatever reason, and you can't really put yourself back into the consciousness of a Roman emperor or Charlemagne. It's impossible to have it would be naive and hubristic to think that we could think like Charlemagne did or think like a Roman emperor did. But it would appear that, say, when it comes to a unified entity like the Roman Empire, that the Caesars and the emperors, they weren't that bothered in interfering in the minutiae of people's lives. Now, whether that was because they couldn't, for the aforementioned reasons, or
Mhm.
whether they just weren't bothered, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, said Jesus, and render unto God what is God's. And I think the emperors thought like that. They left people to get on with it. They could have their own religions. They had to make nominal. They had to sort of pay lip service to, worshipping the emperor and whatever. But nobody really cared, and people were left to get on with their own local traditions, their own local languages and cultures, and all of the rest of it. As long as they paid their taxes, as long as they proffered the gold that was required, that let the emperor get on with his wars wherever he wanted to do it, and all of the rest of it. I don't think they had, and possibly because they couldn't have, but I don't know if they had that. I want inside everyone's head. I want to know what they're thinking
Mhm.
about buying. I want to make a decision over and above what they can do about whether I'm going to let them buy that train ticket or fill up their car with, fossil fuels or whatever. But we have that now. There's a vanity and an overarching, overweening self-importance on the part of the people that seem to be collecting around themselves in the whatever it is, the World Economic Forum or whatever, who do seem to be inviting themselves via the technology to take that minute by minute control of the minutiae of everyone's lives, down to telling us what to think and what not to think, what to say and what not to say. No one's ever attempted that before. Now, whether it was because they couldn't or because it wasn't in their mindset, we'll never know. But we're
Right.
there now. That's the threat. But it's whether or not you're up against something that's benign or malign. If you, I would say, really, I mean, for all the bad press that whatever caricatured figures like Caligula and Nero get, probably because they were being rubbished by the people that succeeded them more than on account of anything they actually did in their own lives. I just don't subscribe to the notion that these people wanted the kind of minute by minute control that for the because it's possible now that there would appear to be an elite, and I loathe using that word, but everyone knows what I mean when I say it, an elite group that does desire that, and now it's within their grasp. And if they're benign, I would say the Roman Empire was pretty benign, really. If you lived under the Pax Romana and whatever, it was, you could have gone to bed the one day and woken up 200 years later and nothing much had changed
Mhm.
in the 200 years. Nothing really was happening, but we don't live with that anymore. And I think we've got a malign presence now, a long
Yeah.
way from benign, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely increasingly wanting to control us, and we're seeing definitely, especially as we get closer to the US elections, and I don't know if you guys experience that over there in the UK. As you get closer to an American election, do things kind of ramp up, or is it when it just gets closer to your own elections where they seem to want to crack down on disinformation and misinformation, and really what they're cracking down on is dissent?
I freely admit that up until the COVID debacle, the COVID hoax, and all of the rest of it, I wasn't really paying attention.
Mm,
Um, so I can't really look back over decades and say and answer that question with much accuracy, because I wouldn't really have paid a huge amount of attention to an upcoming US election. I'd have been notionally interested, but I wouldn't have been following it minute by minute the way I am at the moment.
yeah.
And because I think things have come to a pretty pass now. Your country is in a state of madness, as is mine, as is Europe. It's crazy town at the moment, and it's compelling viewing every day. it seems something happens, in whatever with Joe Biden, who's running the country, a cabinet meeting where he hands it over to his wife. Who ever heard of such a thing? How can that
Well, it
even?
happened
How
under
can that even
Reagan.
be?
In his defense, I suppose, under
It, it,
Ronald Reagan, his
but
wife was running the administration towards the
true,
end because he had lost
it's
it.
and I'm sure similar things happened
Yeah.
under Roosevelt and all of the rest of it, or iterations of the same. But and Kamala and her coronation, it's all I watch it and I think it's gone mad. And similar here, we've got Keir Starmer freshly minted as the prime minister here, and he's obviously, it's a cliche now, but he's clearly using 1984 as an owner's manual for how to run a country.
Oh,
And it's just got, and then you
I
look into
laugh, but it's
Europe,
not
you look
funny,
in,
right? It's
it's
not
not,
funny at
well,
all.
you do have to laugh because ridiculing them and retaining even a dark sense of humor about what these characters are inviting themselves to think and do. But it's the same in France. It's the same, Macron, elections come in that ought to have altered the texture of the government, and he just says, do you know what? No, I'm not having that. And then they do the same in Germany. Thuringia and Bavaria and whatever vote for AfD, Alternative for Germany. And Olaf Scholz says, well, no, those votes are anti-democratic. If you voted for non-establishment parties, that's anti-democratic. If you voted for the establishment parties, then you're democratic, and so those votes don't
Yeah.
count for as much. It's that crazy thing. It's like the 3/5 rule that was applied. Well, it's not the same, but you know what I mean. It's
Right,
finding this
right.
creative way to minimise the importance or the influence of people that you're at least wary about, if not downright disliking those people. So everywhere has gone completely stark, staring mad, and I find myself now, Vladimir Putin puts out whether it was serious or tongue in cheek, an edict saying that anybody in the West that wants to come and find sanctuary in Russia is welcome to come. And you think, 10 years ago, I would not have entertained that for a minute, but now I lie in bed at night and
Right.
think, maybe, maybe
Yeah, we are
Moscow.
living definitely in an insane time.
It's insane.
Who do you think are the they that are creating this, marching us towards this dystopia?
Well, I honestly, you find yourself, a light goes on over your head then, and you're just identified as a conspiracy theorist. But I've been being dismissed as a conspiracy theorist now for several years, and I'm
Right.
quite happy with the term now.
Mhm.
It's in amongst all the other labels that I've had applied to me. And I try not because it's apart from anything else, it's kind of lazy language. It's a
Mhm.
bit imprecise. But I do when I say that, I'm only using it as shorthand for, and I do think there are various groups. The Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission. There are various, the World Economic Forum. There are
Mhm.
various groups which attract a like mind. These
Mhm.
people who are inordinately wealthy. They are intelligent, but they're also kind of stupid clever at the same time. They're single-minded, and they have taken upon themselves the idea that the world would be a better place if they were running it. And I just absolutely accept that there is a centralizing of power. And even if I use the term globalist now on GB News or any of my own channels, I'm liable to get, if I use it on YouTube, I might get demonetized for anti-Semitism just for using the word globalist. The whole thing is becoming so restrictive, prescriptive, and ridiculous. But in answer to your question, I do believe there's a mindset that previously, because of the tech, because of the absence of tech, because of the absence of state capacity, was just limited or hobbled or restricted in its ambitions. But now, because of the technology that we've all taken on board, we carry these manacles, these tags in our pockets all the time. People spend hours a day in that familiar posture, looking at their handcuffs.
Right.
And now the potential's there, and for a certain mindset, that's too tempting to resist.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I've tried to pinpoint who the they are. I think it's a group of just really selfish, self-interested people, and they're all wealthy and in power or both, and they rub elbows with each other. They go to all the same parties and the same events and the same conventions, right? And they're wanting to protect one another.
I
So
think, I
if one
think,
has an idea,
I
j-
think
yeah,
you've just made me think of something there. So I better say it before I forget it, because my
yeah,
mind moves like that. I forget things almost as soon as I think of them. I think they are frightened people. I think I think something like Malthusianism, that idea that there are too many people and too few resources, is as old as time.
mhm,
Malthusianism and the eugenicists and all of the rest of these people that want to take humanity by the scruff of the neck and make it do what they want it to do. It comes from a place of fear. These are people that, in the way that arachnophobics will just see a spider and kill it instantly,
yeah,
even although it poses them no threat, unless it's a funnel web or something. They'll just kill it because they're frightened of it and they just don't want it on their white surface, so they just make it go
mhm,
away. And there's a group out there who want control at the very least of the people, because the presence of people upsets them, because they have drawn unto themselves via wealth and by family connections and all of the rest of it, great wealth, great power, and they don't want to risk losing it. They want to hold on to
mhm,
what they've got, and as they see this seemingly ever burgeoning sort of puffball population that they think is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it's a threat to them. And so I think we have unwittingly, because a lot of us have just let somebody else get on with running countries, and it's too much bother to get in. We've created an ecosystem that has enabled to thrive a kind of psychopathic, parasitic, frightened group of people who now unfortunately have the money and the power and the technology to actually put into place a lot of the means that they need and want to control the pesky people.
yeah. And I think they just help each other. Even if they don't mean to, they do it naturally because that's their inner circle, that's their group of friends. So they think, well, I don't want to enact, this type of thing or push this policy that's going to hurt my friend who's got this company that produces a lot of surveillance, high tech stuff. So I think that they tend to run together. I don't know, I think a lot of people wonder if there is some real cabal that is plotting and planning and sitting in a room and making these decisions and saying, okay, how do we get from point A to point B? Then to point Z in the end, like what's the path there? And I'm not sure if there is that, or if this is, I tend to think it's a group that is self-interested, and it's like a runaway train now, and they're just together doing these things, and we
I,
do frighten them, and
I
they
will
do
put
want to
my
squash us.
I will put my hand up and say I wouldn't rule out the presence of a cabal.
Wait,
I
no,
don't know.
right,
I don't know who they are, so
right,
I can't with forensic accuracy say it definitely exists. But a
right.
lot of it has a lot of the hallmarks of it, and or at the very least, it makes me. I mean, the sort of work that Whitney Webb has done over several years now. That thesis that she puts out, that somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, towards the end of the Second World War, government got into bed with organised crime in the
Mm,
states because these characters had connections in parts of Europe that they wanted in amongst for the sake of prosecuting the Second World War, and that once they had got into bed with these characters, the organised crime, then that relationship has prevailed ever since. And I think it's quite helpful. I think it's quite justifiable to imagine, if not a cabal, then a series of competing crime families. They all want the same thing, and sometimes they take advantage of alliances with one another. But if any one group, the Sopranos or whatever, or
right,
or the Corleones, saw the opportunity to get rid of the other ones and have it all to themselves, then they would. But
right.
I think there's a group of like-minded people that really don't they are amoral, not
Hmm.
not not necessarily immoral, but they don't care about you and me or anyone
Right.
else in pursuit of their objectives. And so maybe not a unified, kind of James Bond style, all sitting around one chrome topped table and all, all together in that way. But I think maybe several competing factions, like minded, powerful, moneyed, they've had a lot of time to prepare and practice, sometimes they're allied with one another, sometimes they're not. So
Right.
that, I think that might be maybe a more helpful analogy than imagining one Mister Big Kingpin and his lieutenants, and they're all just executing his objectives. Although I wouldn't rule it out.
Well, I think we see examples of this every day in our own lives and just in the news. Like, for example, when it comes to the U.S. and the war machine that we have created over here, the U.S. You know what the average American will say is, "Well, you don't want Russia to be the one ruling the world. You don't want China to be the one ruling the world, right?" So there is that, like you mentioned, this sort of like mob-like competition between the families, and you've got the U.S. saying, "Well, we want to remain on top, and we'll do anything, including squash, kill, murder." People in order to remain in that top space. And if we have to hobble a country with sanctions and or stage a coup or go to war, you know, we'll do whatever it takes in order to maintain that power. So we see it even just from nation to nation. How do we, and that desire, but it stems from that desire, right? That desire to remain number one, the desire to remain on top and in control of the entire world.
Something I've become aware of, many things. I mean, I'm holding my hands up to what a duped, gullible person I was for 5 decades. I'm not claiming that I've been aware of this or paying attention to this for very long at all. But I'm on a massive self-driven re-education program, all day, every day, trying desperately to catch up after 5 decades of getting it wrong. I think something that's hard to give up is the idea that there are goodies. I absolutely grew up watching. Well, not grew up. By the time I was watching The West Wing, I was a fully fledged adult. But I watched The West Wing, and I was aware of thinking, if the Democrats are in the White House, and God, dear old Jed Bartlett, and that's the white hats in power, and we're all going to be okay now. Those silly Republicans. Yeah, I had taken on this worldview that we were the goodies, or we were on the side of
Mhm.
the goodies, and that therefore there were baddies. And I think the world becomes a lot more. It makes a lot more sense, and it is a lot more sensible to just see that there are no goodies.
Yeah.
There are just competing interests that are
Hmm.
morally ambivalent at best, if not downright malevolent at times
Right.
when it suits them, and given because these things are being handed on down through the generations from one sort of iteration of the ruling group to the next, and some of them are probably more malign than others. But at best, I think moral ambiguity is there, and you see it. You see it. The response that when Tucker Carlson did his interview with Daryl Cooper, that thing that caused a furore, popular
Yeah.
historian in the
Yeah.
States, and he offered up an alternative thesis, let's say, about World War II, and say someone like Winston Churchill, and he brought down the weight of, the
Yeah.
attempt was made there to just blast him off of the playing board, and all he had done was offer, really. He was. I was just fascinated to listen to him, because I thought, well, that's it. You've obviously read a lot of stuff, and it's interesting to hear that you've interpreted it that way. I
Yeah.
just found that, and I certainly didn't want to destroy. I don't want to see I don't want to see anyone destroyed for having a point of view. But I think for a lot of people, say when it comes to something like World War II, you've got load-bearing myths. There are figures and sequences of events that have become holy writ,
Hmm.
graven in stone. Like this you see it at the bottom of a building. This foundation stone was laid by da, 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 and the whole edifice is built on top of that. And if you were to chip out that foundational, that load bearing myth, the whole thing might come down. And so people are very, very protective of the edifice, and therefore they are extremely protective of the load bearing myth at the bottom of it. And I think, as well, Daryl Cooper said, maybe in another generation or two, when everyone to do with World War II is in their grave, and
Yeah.
maybe a bit of an air brake even then, historians might look back and reevaluate characters and events differently than they are now. But I think
Yeah.
it's all part of that thing that too many people, intellectuals, movers and shakers, decision makers, are wedded to ideas about good and bad, heroes and villains. And I think in most instances, it's easier if you just allow that these people were, let's just say, human, and they were shades of light and dark at best.
Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.